My algorithm thinks I'm a lesbian woman.
Yeah.
I like to think of myself as an honorary member. I would say a majority of my friends are lesbians. And it's just like, my TikTok has figured me out. I love it. Yeah.
What would my father do?
Oliver, welcome back to the Netherlands.
Thank you. Thank you.
How are you feeling? What kind of time in your life is this day right now?
This is super exciting. It feels, there is like elements of the past like few months that has felt like the first album with the XX. And that's a feeling I never thought I would feel again. So, you know, everything's feeling a little bit new and different. It's very exciting.
What's that feeling? Can you explain the emotions, the thoughts there?
It's the unknown of just like when we put out that first record, we didn't know who it was going to reach, like where it was going to take us. And like definitely that feeling is like quite a bit of fear, but it's a good kind of fear. So I look forward to that.
Yeah, you're excited.
I am terrified, but very excited, very excited.
How do you cope with that? Because it's a combination of being terrified and excited at the same time, or how do you feel?
I don't think I cope. I mean,
To be honest,
think I cope. But I make it work. But I've never performed without Romy or Jamie by my side. So it's going to be new, and it's like I'm performing with a new band, and I love them. I'm learning so much from them, but I'm never going to be able to recreate that level of like security and like almost like unspoken understanding that I have with Romy and Jamie.
Oh, that's interesting.
I've known Romy since I was 3 years old and Jamie since I was 11. It's going to take, and I've just started working with this band, so it's going to take 30 years to reach
Just starting.
that level of,
I'll speak to you by then. So I read that you're a fan of horror movies. What do you enjoy about them? Because I don't even dare to go to the cinemas if I see that it's going to be like a horror, a creepy movie. I don't even...
Yeah. Well, like, I am... On the surface, it doesn't make sense that I would like horror. I'm a very fearful person. But I gravitate towards horror because it doesn't scare me necessarily. Like, I'm not scared of monsters or ghouls or ghosts or serial killers. I'm sure a serial killer would be scary if I ever met one, but my fears are a lot more based in... They're a lot more local. I'm afraid of like relationships.
Are you?
That's the kind of thing. No, like, you know, like losing relationships, or they're just a lot more based in reality and at home. Mm-hmm. And I think like horror's taught me so much about the world in that it's taught me to laugh at fear sometimes, and it's given me a sense of control in that I can pause it, I can step away from it, I can be entertained by it. And also horror can be violent, it can be scary, it can be dark, but it can also be camp, and it can be ridiculous, and it can be funny, and also meaningful. It does my favorite thing of holding the dark and the light at the same time, which is what I've tried to have done in this record, and like everything I've put out with it. So I didn't want to make just like, every time I've tried to describe this record and I've said, you know, the themes of fear and shame, and I've lent into a lot of the horror I love, I'm worried that I'm painting a picture of a very dark sounding record of just like scary, dark, heavy record, and it's not that. There's a lot of joy, and there's humor, and there's fun.
Yes, but that's what I think is important. Like the humor that you, as you mentioned, you can laugh about it, and it's also ridiculous. You know, the horror movies at some times.
Yeah.
What are some of your favorites?
My favorites are, I love a lot of the kind of classics. So like Carrie is a film that has meant a lot to me. And it's actually one of the films that scares me. But I'm not scared of the gore or the blood or the like telekinesis. That doesn't scare me. Carrie's mother scares me so much, because it's like the idea of your mother, who's meant to be the person that protects you and keeps you safe, to be the actual villain. Like, Carrie's mother says to her, "Don't go to the party. They're all going to laugh at you." That is what
That's
that's so evil and so scary, because that's the voice of my anxiety.
Yeah.
But being said by like your mother. So I love Carrie.
Sounds fun.
Sounds fun. But also Carrie gets her revenge. Well, she doesn't have a great ending, but
Spoiler alert.
No, but she's a character that means a lot to me. And there are other characters like Norman Bates from Psycho, who I love, or Buffalo Bill, or Patrick Bateman, Hannibal Lecter. They're the like villains that I kind of gravitate towards. And then there's the like heroines of Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween, or Sigourney Weaver in Alien. They're like the women that as a little boy I would watch and I'd be like, I want to be that. I love them. Yeah.
Let's talk about the record, because you made a very moving statement with the release of the single Hideous, disclosing your HIV status. What was the process of that decision like? When did you realize you needed or wanted to talk about it openly?
It's been a long process. You know, I didn't know what kind of record I was going to be making when I first started writing it. But after the first few songs, I realized there was a theme of just like shame and fear. And I've become a real believer that the best way for me to like experience release and freedom from those feelings is just sharing it and vocalizing some of the things that I think make me less than or monstrous, or the things that I struggle with about myself. Whereas like in the past, I've held on to those things really tightly because I'm like, I don't want people to see that. But that hasn't worked for me, because those feelings of shame, they thrive in me trying to hide them. They just kind of like, it multiplies and it grows in the dark. So I'd written a few songs, and it like had opened up so many conversations in my day-to-day life, and I had experienced some freedom. And I reached a point where I kind of realized I was circling around my status. And that my HIV is probably the thing that's caused me the most shame. One of the things that's caused me the most shame. And I was like, right, I'm going to put it in a song. And I was feeling quite like impulsive. I was like, I'm going to put it in a song and I'm going to release it. And then I'm going to be so much better for it.
Yeah, it's going to solve.
It's going to solve everything. Yeah. Exactly. And I played that to my mum, and my mum was like, "Okay, hold on. This seems very drastic. Seems quite you, in that." Like people have said, you know, the songwriting is honest. I have not been described as honest very much in my life. Because it's much easier to put it in a song and put it out into the world than turn my back to it.
Like vaguely in a song, you mean? Or
just throw out a bold statement without having to... Nothing is scarier than sat with someone making eye contact. If I had released that song when I wrote it 2 years ago, like sitting here with you, having just met for the first time and talking about my HIV would have been impossible 2 years ago. I
Yeah.
couldn't have done it, like physically impossible. But I've spent, like, my mum suggested I start having conversations with people in my life. There were like some people that didn't know, or there were some people I'd maybe told once and then just been like, okay, that's done. We don't talk about that now. And like the beginnings of those conversations was so uncomfortable, but every conversation I had, it became less and less heavy, and it felt less like a secret I was holding on to. And, you know, the feedback I got, I felt less and less monstrous, it didn't feel like something that made me less than or unlovable in any way. It did the opposite. And then, you know, like come the time of, I released the song 2 weeks ago, and it didn't feel like a huge reveal for me. It didn't feel like a drastic thing because I'd done the work of having conversations. You know, I don't recommend to everyone that they blast very personal information on a huge scale, but I do recommend having conversations, because, you know, I think it's wonderful to practice like self-love and tell yourself you're great. But in my experience, that hasn't always worked on its own. I think it's important to also vocalize some self-loathing you're feeling, with the same destination of like feeling a bit more at peace with yourself. But anyway, I'm sounding too much like a life coach right now.
No, I'm
Like,
listening. Go ahead.
I'm only like speaking from my own experience. Yeah.
And the record and short film, as you mentioned, talk about the themes like shame and maybe also feeling different, so to say. I was wondering, how old were you when you started realizing that maybe you were different from the other kids? Was there a moment in your life?
Yeah. I mean, I think from an early age, I can think about things where I'm like, oh, maybe that was like the first like feelings of like shame or feeling a bit like an outsider. But I tell you what, there's a line in the song Hideous, which is like, I have people in my life that really love me. And that is potentially like my favorite line I've ever written, because it's like a real gratitude, because I've had moments of feeling very sorry for myself, but the one thing I've never felt sorry for myself is I have such great people in my life. I love my family, and I love Romy and Jamie. And Romy I've had since I was 3 years old, Jamie since I was 11. So if I ever was an outsider, the three of us were outsiders.
Yeah.
And I've always kind of like felt a part of something. Yeah, love them.
That's beautiful. And in the short film, we see a child watching you on the TV, on the television, and recognizing parts of himself. Do you remember the first time you felt represented in media like that?
Yeah. There's been like a few moments. I think like growing up as a little gay boy, there was a lot of me like searching for queer moments that weren't necessarily either like a little bit hidden or just weren't there, and I was making them up. So like I was obsessed with like a lot of female characters. They were a lot of the characters I identified with. People like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I was like, okay, cool. She's like beautiful and she's like feminine, but she's also like angry and powerful. I was like, I want to be that. And then like some of them like monsters and ghouls in horror that were seen as being outsiders for what made them different. I was like, I loved them. But there's a TV presenter and host called Graham Norton in the UK, and he's had a show for years and years. And I remember like watching his TV show with my stepmom, Tracy. And she was like, she'd like clocked me at like 12 years old. She'd realized this was a little gay boy. And she was like, do you know, Oliver, Graham likes to have relationships with men. And I was like, okay, cool, good for Graham. And then she was like, do you know, that's totally okay. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. How dare you? But he meant a lot to me because he was so visible, and he's so good. He's so funny, and he's so like, I don't know, just like engaging and interesting and interested in his guests. So he meant a lot to me, and still does. I would say he was like my earliest memory.
That's so cool. And you mentioned that conversation, like, I wish my mom ever had that talk with me, because when I came out through a text, she was like, okay, that's fine. I said, have you ever like saw something or realized, no, nothing. Just, I wish someone would ask me, you know, like not to have it as a secret and as a kind of big reveal to your friends. That was, for me, a sort of horrible thing.
Yeah.
Talking about shame.
Yeah. But do you know what? I'm trying to find like an artful way of saying this without aging myself. but I see kids now. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm so... do you know, I see Lil Nas X, and I'm like, as a kid, like as an adult, I love him, but like as a kid, I'm like, this guy would have meant so much to me. Yeah. And there is like loads more representation, and I hope kids don't have to dig as much for like queer moments and representation, and things are a lot better. They're not where they should be, but things are a lot better.
Yeah. I can hear what you're saying. Sometimes I'm trying to explain the importance of lesbian TikTok to my friends. And
oh my
like,
God, I love lesbian TikTok.
I needed it. I needed it 10 years ago. It's so unapologetic.
I like to think of myself as an honorary member. I would say a majority of my friends are lesbians. And it's just like, my TikTok has figured me out. I love it. Yeah.
And you spoke with Elton John recently on his Rocket Hour radio show. And I read that you contacted him for advice when you started making your solo record, as well as Bronski Beat founder Jimmy Somerville. We just mentioned him, who also features on Hideous. What were those conversations with these musical pioneers like for you?
It was those relationships. You know, I've really tried to make new friends, and I've really tried to make, in particular, friends with older queer. I'm gonna be very careful with that word. More experienced, more experienced queer people. Yeah. I've cut the ones that have paved the way for all of us. Because I want to learn. I want to learn from them, and also I found it so nurturing. You know, I reached out to Jimmy because Jimmy not only has one of my favorite voices ever, but he has been such like a powerful voice for queer people, for HIV and AIDS, for just like people that feel a bit other. And he's been so nurturing, and he's been so like gentle and kind with me, and he's taught me so much. He's like told me so many fantastic stories, and the same with Elton. You know, Elton has been around for such a long time, and he is so interested in new music. He's more up to date than me or like most of my friends. And I just think that's the coolest thing, to still have that like interest and like passion. That's what I want to be. That's what I want to be in. When I'm Elton's age, I will not say his age. When I am his age. And people like Anani or John Grant, like these like relationships that I've tried to kind of gain have taught me so much. It's nice to have friends. You know, pre-COVID, I had this idea of myself that I was a little bit of a loner. I've got my people, but other than that, I'm an insular person. I don't think I'm that. COVID's taught me one thing. I quite like people. I find them scary, but I get so much energy and like I get so much from people, and they're not that scary, and they're nice. They're great. I like people. Yeah.
This is such an exciting era. Yeah. This is such amazing. Thank you so much for your time. Really looking forward for the record.
You.
And hopefully see you perform soon live.
Yes.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
3